Oh, Industria, I have a lot to say about thee. Industria, for those of you that aren't already aware of it, is a story-driven first-person shooter game which also heavily incorporates a lot of atmospheric puzzle-solving into its design. To give you a basic spoiler-lite rundown of the story and setting, Industria initially takes place on November 9th, 1989, hours before the Berlin Wall would ultimately fall. This is ultimately referenced in the game itself very early on, which I find to be rather cool. I'm not sure exactly why they picked this particular moment in history, but for the purposes of providing an interesting, inciting incident for the protagonist, it serves well enough. You work at a secret government facility and, due presumably to the riots, an experiment over at said facility begins to spiral out of control, and your character's love interest finds himself forced to deal with the issue himself by shutting everything down. You chase after him, but as you see when you enter the now abandoned facility and try to help shut it all down, it's already too late. An interdimensional breach opens and you find yourself in an alternate dystopian reality, with no one to help you but this one old man who communicates with you over a walkie-talkie. The game opens up from this point on, and I'm not looking to spoil that experience for anyone interested, but it's important to provide at least a brief overview on the game's narrative framework, because it's arguably one of the most strongly emphasized components in the game. At its core, the game and its developers have been very explicit about how influenced they were by games like Half-Life 2 during the design process. When they initially released an official Steam demo during this year's Steam Next Fest, there was a point of contention between myself and the developers, as the two levels featured in the demo felt to me so strongly similar to Half-Life and Half-Life 2 that the differences were barely distinguishable to me during my playthrough of said demo. And for the record, I say this as someone who does not enjoy Half-Life as a series. To me, I've always found it to be one of Valve's most overrated and generic franchises. Portal and TF2 for the win, just my opinion. When it comes to Half-Life, I can respect a game's legacy without having to like the game myself. In any case, luckily when I did a full playthrough of Industria, I did find that the game was fully capable of standing on its own two metaphorical feet. In hindsight, I think the developers did the game an honest disservice in terms of how they chose to present the demo and market the game on social media ahead of its release. And to be fair, I've said this directly to them, and to their credit, they've openly agreed, so I'm not going to harp on that anymore. Whereas the gameplay and the atmospheric world design are clearly Industria's strongest attributes, it's the story to me that felt the weakest. For those interested in the story, don't worry, I won't be giving away any explicit spoilers here, fear not, but I'll still need to touch on a few spoiler-lite details. The story follows your typical 3-act structure, with the first being the introductory stuff that leads up to the interdimensional travel, laying the groundwork, and then you have the second act where the character is trying to find her aforementioned love interest, with some help from your walkie-talkie companion. And then you have the third act, which, when you leave the big futuristic industrial city in favor of this more secluded location for the finale. It's here that the game's story takes a noticeable and immediate downhill turn. The game inexplicably abandons the story that had been established up until this point, abandoning all the questions we, the character and the player, had been both explicitly and implicitly asking in favor of a LSD-like message of nothing really matters. This kind of resolution is inherently a tricky one in terms of narrative structure, and generally speaking, you better have one hell of a payoff to justify telling the player that they've been wasting their time playing the game and being an active participant in the world. And the obvious problem is that Industria never gives you that reason or justification. And to make it worse, the lead up to this felt incredibly rushed. One of my biggest narrative pet peeves as both an English degree student myself and a gamer is when a game or other narrative-focused entertainment like a movie or TV show introduces a ton of spoken or unspoken plot points and details, only to then go a completely different direction with a cheap gotcha. I don't like having the rug yanked from under me without any meaningful reason. Having a last-minute twist just for the sake of having a last-minute twist isn't something that most people, I think, will appreciate. People aren't stupid, they'll see right through that kind of thing. That said, there's a lot within the story I do like. The setup, while not breaking any new ground in terms of originality, functions well enough. The main character's motivation is laid out very clearly, also for a game that kind of has to throw a lot of exposition at you early on as you explore the city. Industria does a pretty good job delivering that information through conversation in a way that feels fairly natural, something a lot of other indie games tend to struggle with or fail outright at. I adore the detail they put into the city and enemy types, and to a certain degree, I was a little intrigued by the PT-esque library sequences where every time you go in there, something a little bit more unsettling happens than the last time you went in there. I do feel the developers could have expanded upon this a bit. Sure, starting at different points in the library was a nice touch, but in the literal in-game library, It would have been nice if there was a bit more that would have carried over to the real world. Maybe hide some collectible lore notes or posters or stuff that could be zoomed in or flipped over to reveal additional information. Industria handled these mini-levels adequately, but I would say that the limited amount of lore we did get, and I'm trying to be vague here because I don't want to spoil anything major, it could have and probably should have been delivered in the main portion of the game itself rather than separated into its own thing. I don't think anything of narrative substance delivered in these sections necessarily warranted the inclusion of these mini-levels as their own separate entity. I've seen a lot of people criticize Industria for being so short. For the record, my full playthrough of the game lasted about an hour and 45 minutes, and I probably could have beat it probably in an hour and a half, even with the cutscenes, now that I know what to do. Yeah, it's definitely a short game, but honestly that doesn't really bother me so much as what they do and don't do in that time. Some of my favorite indie and AA games of the past decade, like The Stanley Parable or The Forest, are both only about 2 hours long, if you're trying to rush through it. I'd much rather a game deliver on all fronts in only 2 or 3 hours than be pointlessly padded out with meaningless extra fluff. If it was up to me, I do think Industria would have been better served by extending the length by maybe an hour, bringing it up to maybe 3 hours instead of 2, and filling in some of the many plot holes, even if it meant increasing the retail price of the game from $20 to $25. While you can always make a sequel, prequel, DLC, or some other way, you can't unmake or really retcon that which you've already released. For me, it's for narrative-related reasons, not the more superficial or arbitrary reasons others seem to be citing. By the way, you can criticize a game for whatever reason you like, I'm not saying you can't, but I do feel there are more substantial and helpful ways of delivering criticism than others. While I'm very mixed on how I feel about the story, I do want to slip in a quick side note and say the voice acting is actually surprisingly solid all around. Granted, there are only a couple of speaking characters, but at least we're spared any low-effort mailed-in performances, something that even large-scale AAA games like Destiny 1 embarrassed us all with on day one. The gameplay is where the game really does shine for the most part, though. Since combat is a heavy focus at times, I'll start with gunplay. There isn't a wide variety of guns, which I don't really mind since it keeps in line with the whole fish-out-of-water survivor tone. It'd be a bit weird if this main character, on day one of being stuck in this alternate reality, to have acquired this massive armory of weapons, ammo, and supplies. I'm not sure if I picked up every type of weapon in the game, but during my playthrough I probably picked up 4 or 5 weapons, including your basic pistol, a machine gun, a shotgun, and a sniper. All of them, with the exception of the shotgun, felt pretty solid to use. The sniper in particular felt a bit too ridiculously powerful. One shot from that, pretty much regardless of where the shot landed on the enemy, would almost always result in an insta-kill, whereas the shotgun, even at close range, would still sometimes take 2 or 3 shots to finish off an enemy. While far from useless, the shotgun at times did often feel like a slightly upgraded pistol in terms of damage output. Personally, I would have preferred it if the availability of shotgun ammo was just a bit slightly reduced, in favor of lending a bit more impact to the weapon itself, but whatever. I did notice the enemy AI did seem to be a bit buggy at times. There were a few moments where I'd be opening fire at enemies with the machine gun or the shotgun, and they'd still be acting like they didn't know I was there. Likewise, I ran into another funny scenario where I kept getting small amounts of damage from an enemy, but I couldn't initially tell where the incoming fire was from. Turns out the enemy model was stuck halfway into a wall, just leaning out of it enough to be able to shoot at me at certain angles, but I couldn't shoot at them. It was very bizarre. These bugs didn't in any significant way really impact my experience playing, but they did pop up every now and then in a mildly funny kind of way. I liked how during the early sections that take place in the city, you make great use of your flashlight. You do have to see where you're going, while also trying not to burn through your battery too quickly. I would have liked to see more of this. It would have made for an interesting opportunity for another puzzle, among other things. Speaking of which, there were a handful of interesting environmental puzzles scattered throughout, but I didn't really find any of them that difficult. There was one puzzle that briefly confused me because the instructions seemed to be in German, and I was going to try to look online for some help, but then I realized I just didn't hover over the right spot for an English translation. Odds are if you can beat the first few levels of Portal 1 and 2, you'll be more than up to the very low difficulty bar Industria's puzzles present. They're engaging but not overly difficult, which I'm more than fine with. I was very impressed with how beautiful the game looked visually. The textures and models, for the most part, all appear very high quality. I've seen too many dystopian games of both the AAA and indie varieties that have the mindset of, well, everything is grungy and depressing, so no one's going to look too closely at our blurry, low-quality assets, so we can cut corners there. I'm glad to note that I did not see much of that in Industria. The game was also incredibly well optimized. I played it on my NVIDIA 2070 RTX GPU, and was able to run it at max settings while maintaining a consistent at 60 FPS or higher for almost the entirety of the game. I only noticed one single instance where there was a noticeable decrease in frame rate below 60, and even then, it only dipped to around 50 while it loaded something. I expect the odd occasional hiccup when it comes to pretty much playing any game, but I'm very glad to say that if you're worried about how well the game will perform on your system, I think it's safe to say that unless you're running Industria off your parents' Dell integrated GPU-powered multi-purpose PC, odds are you'll be able to run it decently fine. Overall, I feel that Industria in almost every way lives up to its promises, but it does in some other ways fall short of its potential. I do believe the developers have been very interested in making a great game, the type of game that they themselves would enjoy playing. And it's a very solid game, and those of you who do like what you see, I do encourage you to go check out the game on Steam and consider picking it up to support them, because despite its flaws, I can't say I regret playing it. I enjoyed my time with Industria, and I'm not looking to tear it down here. When I deal out criticism in these videos, my goal is to ensure people know what it is they're buying. Even if only a single developer in the industry watches videos like this and hears my criticism, it's something they can hopefully keep in mind while working on their future game. At any rate, that's where I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. Happy upcoming or belated Thanksgiving, depending on when this video goes live, and I'll be back with new review videos soon. I've been a bit preoccupied with my 400 level university classes. I almost missed the days of 100 level classes where I'd only have to write 1 or 2 papers over a semester. Now I'm doing them almost every other week. Luckily, the end of term soon approaches, so I look forward to getting out more videos like this consistently for you soon. In the meantime, if you want to support what I do here, subscribing and clicking the bell on YouTube to force YouTube to notify you when I upload would really help, because they suck at letting you know otherwise. Also, as ever, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I read all comments posted on the channel, and I end up responding to most of them, so if you want to have a chat with me, you know where to find me. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody. Stay safe and peace out.